Story 1. The Night Visitor. It was late October, and the nights had started getting colder. I was 28, living alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of town. It was a cozy place, perfect for someone who valued solitude as much as I did. That night, I decided to watch a horror movie, feeling brave and wanting to get into the Halloween spirit. The movie was intense, and as I sat in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the TV, I found myself getting more and more absorbed in the story. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified in the silence. After the movie ended, I decided to head to bed, turning off all the lights as I went. I had been asleep for about an hour when I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. At first, I thought I must be dreaming, but then I heard it again. Soft, deliberate steps on the hardwood floor. My heart raced as I strained to listen. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. Summoning my courage, I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and slowly crept toward the door. I opened it just a crack and peeked out into the hallway. There was no one there. I checked the locks on the front and back doors. They were secure. Puzzled and still shaken, I returned to bed. As I lay there, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, I heard a soft whisper. It was coming from the living room. "Help me," the voice said, almost too faint to hear. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. Gathering my courage, I decided to confront whatever was making that sound. I tiptoed into the living room, bat in hand, and turned on the light. The room was empty, but the back door was slightly ajar. I knew I had locked it before going to bed. I quickly shut and locked it again, my mind racing. I decided to stay awake for the rest of the night, keeping the lights on and the bat close by. When morning finally came, I called a locksmith to change all the locks on the doors. I never found out who or what was in my house that night, but I never felt truly alone there again. Story 2. The Man in the Mirror. I was 24, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the city. My roommate Mike was out of town for the weekend, leaving me alone. It was a Saturday night, and I had just returned from a party. Feeling a bit tipsy, I decided to take a shower before bed. The bathroom was small, with an old, slightly warped mirror above the sink. As I showered, I thought I heard a noise coming from the living room. I dismissed it as the wind or the neighbors. After my shower, I wiped the steam off the mirror and froze. There was a man standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the bathroom was empty. I turned back to the mirror and he was still there, staring at me with dark, hollow eyes. I blinked and he was gone. Shaken, I rushed out of the bathroom, making sure to lock the door behind me. I checked the entire apartment, but there was no one there. I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe I was just tired. But deep down, I knew it was something more. I decided to sleep on the couch that night, leaving the lights on. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was coming from the bathroom. I slowly got up and crept towards the door. The whispering stopped as I got closer. I hesitated, then slowly opened the door. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror was fogged up again, even though I hadn't used it since my shower. Written in the condensation were the words, "I'm watching you." My blood ran cold. I backed out of the bathroom and shut the door, grabbing my phone to call Mike. He didn't answer, so I left him a panicked voicemail. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife, unable to sleep. When Mike returned the next day, I told him everything. He laughed it off, but agreed to switch rooms with me. I never used that bathroom again, and eventually moved out. But I'll never forget the man in the mirror. Story 3. The Basement Intruder. I was 35 and had just bought my first house, an old Victorian in a quiet neighborhood. It was a fixer-upper, but I loved it. I spent my weekends doing renovations, slowly bringing it back to its former glory. One weekend, I decided to tackle the basement. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes left by the previous owners. As I started clearing it out, I found a small, locked door under the stairs. Curious, I broke the lock and opened it. Inside was a small room with a single, dusty chair and an old, broken mirror on the wall. As I stood there, I heard a faint whisper. "Get out," it said. I spun around. but there was no one there. I tried to shrug it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to take a break and went upstairs to make some coffee. That night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a noise coming from the basement. It sounded like footsteps on the stairs. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down, my heart pounding. The basement was empty, but the small door under the stairs was wide open. I was sure I had closed it. I shut the door and locked it again, then went back to bed. Just as I was drifting off, I heard the footsteps again, followed by a whisper, "Get out!" I jumped out of bed and rushed to the basement, but it was empty. The door under the stairs was open again. I decided to stay up for the rest of the night, keeping the flashlight and a baseball bat close by. As I sat in the living room, I heard the whisper again, this time coming from behind me. "Get out!" I spun around, but there was no one there. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, asking if everything was okay. I replied that I was fine, but I knew I wasn't. The next morning, I called a locksmith to install new locks on the basement door and every other door in the house. I also had a security system installed, but even with all that, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I eventually sold the house, unable to live with the constant fear. I never found out who or what was in the basement, but I'll never forget the feeling of those eyes watching me from the darkness. Story 4. The Mysterious Neighbor. 1998. I moved into an old apartment building on the edge of a sleepy town. The building had a charming, if slightly dilapidated appeal, with ivy crawling up its brick walls and large sunlit windows. It seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start after college. I was 25 and had just landed a job at a local marketing firm. From day one, something felt off. I had the uncanny sensation of being watched, especially from across the hall. There, in an apartment that had seen better days, lived an elderly woman. She was rarely seen, but always present, her shadowy figure visible through her slightly ajar window. Her eyes, when they met mine, held an unsettling intensity. One evening, after a grueling day at work, I returned home to find her standing by her window again. The sky was dark, and the building was shrouded in shadows. I quickly unlocked my door and slipped inside, locking it behind me, my heart racing from a combination of exhaustion and unease. That night, as I tried to fall asleep, I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my door. The sound was insistent, almost frantic. I crept to the door, peering through the peephole to see the elderly woman standing there. Her face was obscured by the darkness, but her presence was undeniable. Nervously, I opened the door a crack. "Please, can you help me? I'm locked out of my apartment," she pleaded. Reluctantly, I let her in. The moment she crossed the threshold, she vanished. I was left staring at an empty hallway, my mind reeling. I quickly locked the door and stumbled back to bed, my sleep disturbed by the night's events. The next day, I decided to ask my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, about the mysterious woman. Mrs. Thompson, a kind, middle-aged woman who lived next to me, answered the door with a friendly smile. "Do you know the elderly woman across the hall?" I asked. "She came to my door last night but disappeared." Mrs. Thompson's smile faded and she looked puzzled. "There's no elderly woman living across the hall. That apartment has been vacant for years." Confused and disturbed, I pressed on. "But I've seen her almost every day. She's always watching from the window." Mrs. Thompson's expression grew serious. "That apartment belonged to Mrs. Wilkins. She was an elderly woman who lived there for decades, but she passed away under mysterious circumstances. No one has lived there since." The revelation hit me like a cold wave. I had been seeing the ghost of Mrs. Wilkins. Determined to understand more, I began researching her. According to local records and old newspaper articles, Mrs. Wilkins was a reclusive woman who rarely left her apartment. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises and a scream one night. When they investigated, they found her dead, but the cause of death was never determined. Her apartment had remained empty ever since. Eager to uncover the truth, I contacted a local paranormal investigator named Mark. He arrived with a range of equipment, EMF meters, digital recorders, and infrared cameras. That night, we set up in my apartment and waited. As darkness enveloped the building, the atmosphere grew tense. The air felt heavy, and I could sense a presence. The EMF meter began to spike and the room grew cold. Mark started his investigation, asking questions into the void. "Is there anyone here with us?" he inquired. A faint voice crackled through the recorder. "Yes," Mark pressed on. "Who are you?" "Margaret Wilkins," the voice responded. "Why are you still here?" Mark asked. "I can't leave. I need help," the voice answered. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I felt an icy touch on my shoulder. Mark continued the ritual, burning sage and reciting prayers. The air crackled with energy, and a gust of wind extinguished the sage. Mark intensified the ritual, and gradually the room warmed, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The EMF meter returned to normal. Mark looked at me with relief. "I believe she's found peace now." From that night forward, I never saw Mrs. Wilkins again. The eerie feeling of being watched vanished, and I finally felt comfortable in my home. My experience with the supernatural had changed me profoundly, making me more aware of the unseen world and the importance of compassion. Reflecting on the events, I realized how little we truly understand about the world around us. My encounter with Mrs. Wilkins' ghost was a reminder of the mysteries that lie beyond our daily lives and the importance of empathy for the struggles of others, seen or unseen. Story 5. The Midnight Caller. It was a typical Friday evening in the small town of Ridgewood, and Jenna was settling in for a quiet night at home. The 27-year-old marketing executive had recently moved into a charming old house that she had fallen in love with for its character and history. She was excited to finally have a place of her own, but tonight, her excitement would turn into a chilling experience she would never forget. Jenna had spent the evening watching a marathon of her favorite crime dramas. As the clock struck midnight, she decided to head to bed. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. The night was clear, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees outside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Just as Jenna was about to drift off, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Frowning, she picked it up and answered. The line was silent for a moment. Then a distorted voice spoke. "Jenna, I see you." A shiver ran down her spine. She tried to play it cool, thinking it might be a prank call. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The voice continued. "You don't know me, but I know you. I'm watching you." Jenna's heart raced. She quickly hung up and tried to calm herself. She told herself it was probably just a wrong number or a prank. She locked her phone and placed it on the bedside table, determined to get some sleep. An hour later, Jenna was jolted awake by a loud bang downstairs. Her heart pounded in her chest as she lay still in bed, trying to make sense of the noise. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. She carefully got out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs, straining to listen. The house was eerily quiet again. Jenna tried to convince herself it was just her imagination. She slowly descended the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. As she reached the bottom, she noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. Jenna distinctly remembered locking it before going to bed. She approached the door cautiously and pulled it open further, peering into the dark street outside. Nothing seemed amiss, so she closed the door and locked it again. As she turned to head back upstairs, she heard the distinct sound of footsteps coming from the basement. The basement had always unsettled Jenna. It was an old, musty place with low ceilings and dim lighting. The thought of someone being down there made her feel sick with fear. Nevertheless, she knew she had to check it out. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made her way to the basement door. The stairs leading down to the basement were steep and narrow. Jenna's flashlight flickered as she descended, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. She reached the bottom and scanned the room with her light. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and a dusty pool table. There was no sign of anyone. Jenna felt a slight sense of relief, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned to head back up the stairs when she noticed something unusual, a dark, wet footprint on the concrete floor, leading towards a storage closet. Her stomach churned. The closet door was slightly ajar, and Jenna hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, there was nothing but old holiday decorations and dusty boxes. She was about to close the door when she noticed something small and metallic glinting in the corner. It was a silver locket. Jenna picked it up and examined it. The locket was engraved with intricate designs and had a tiny photo inside. The photo was too small to make out clearly, but it looked like it might be a picture of someone familiar. She pocketed the locket and made her way back upstairs, her mind racing with possibilities. When she reached the top of the stairs, Jenna felt an overwhelming urge to call the police. She picked up her phone, but before she could dial, it rang again. The same distorted voice came through the line. "Did you find what you were looking for, Jenna?" Her blood ran cold. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The voice replied, "You have something that belongs to me. Return it, or else." Jenna was terrified, but determined not to let this person control her. She ended the call and dialed 911. As she waited for the police to arrive, she kept the locket close, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The police arrived within minutes. Jenna explained everything that had happened and showed them the locket. They took her statement and examined the basement, but found no evidence of an intruder. They advised her to stay vigilant and keep her doors locked. After the police left, Jenna locked every door and window in the house and tried to get some rest. She placed the locket in a drawer and resolved to find out more about its origins. The next day, she visited a local historian who specialized in the town's history. The historian examined the locket and told Jenna that it belonged to a woman who had lived in the house many decades ago. The woman had disappeared mysteriously, and the case had never been solved. The locket was reportedly one of her most treasured possessions. Jenna was shocked. She realized that the voice on the phone might have been connected to the woman's disappearance. Determined to uncover the truth, she started researching the old case, hoping to find answers and put her mind at ease. As the days passed, Jenna became more engrossed in the mystery. She discovered that the woman's disappearance was linked to a series of local legends about a haunted house and a secret lover. It seemed that the story of the locket was intertwined with a tragic tale of love and loss. Eventually, Jenna's research led her to a breakthrough. She uncovered a letter written by the missing woman, detailing her fear of someone who had been stalking her. The letter mentioned a silver locket and warned that it should never be returned to its original owner. The pieces began to fall into place. The man who had called Jenna was likely the same person who had caused the woman's disappearance. By returning the locket, Jenna had inadvertently stirred up old fears and triggered a haunting chain of events. With this knowledge, Jenna took steps to protect herself. She consulted with experts on paranormal activity and security measures. She even moved to a new house, leaving the old one behind. Though the mystery of the missing woman was never fully resolved, Jenna found solace in knowing that she had taken every measure to ensure her safety. The experience left her with a newfound respect for the unknown and a deeper understanding of the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil of everyday life. Jenna's story became a cautionary tale in Ridgewood, a reminder that sometimes the past reaches out in unexpected ways. And as she moved on with her life, she always remembered the chilling call that set her on a path to uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows.